Okay, beautiful.
All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. As you heard, my name is Liz. I'm with Ontariogreen Conservation Association, and we're a charitable organization that's dedicated to environmental education in classrooms and communities. So along with the numerous presentations that we have for adults on all kinds of different subjects, we have more than 30 presentations for school-age kids between kindergarten and grade 8, and some for high schools too. And I've given presentations to more than 88,000 students around the province. And we do all of these things at no charge. So today we're going to be talking about coyotes. I know that it's been a current subject of discussion in Niagara Falls, potentially other areas as well. And if you wouldn't mind, if you could just maybe let me know what brought you here today, what your interest was. You can just unmute yourselves. The unmute button is down in the bottom left-hand corner.
Or if anybody wants to type in the chat, I just opened it on the, you can type in the chat as well.
Okay, I guess we can go first. My husband and I live in South Niagara. And we live rurally, so coyotes move around us all the time. We love to hear them at night, and we don't have a fear or a worry about them. We're not in, like, we have different concerns probably than urban people who live in the urban areas. So,
okay.
But it's knowledge is a good thing, and if you can take away some tips that you can speak to someone who maybe does have concerns or fears about them, then maybe that will be helpful to them too. So thank you, Liz.
Okay, thanks, Leslie. Is there anyone else who wants to say anything? Because if not, I will just get started.
I think somebody typed in the chat, seeing coyotes in our neighborhoods and hearing them at night.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that happens to me too. I live in the town of Lincoln, and behind my house is a ravine, and it's attached to a lot of other natural areas. And so we quite frequently, and there's a peach tree orchard across the street. So the coyotes are moving back and forth between those areas. So we hear them quite frequently. I've lived here now for 14 years. I've only ever seen them twice, but we hear them, especially during the winter, we hear them quite often. All right, so just before I start the presentation, I'll explain why I'm doing a presentation on coyotes, how it came about. And how it came about was several years ago, I lived in Oakville. And there was an incident in Oakville where a couple young girls were playing in a backyard, and the backyard had a gate that was open to a natural area in behind their property. It's actually, they shouldn't have had the gate. You're not supposed to have those gates in Oakville going into natural areas. But anyways, they did, and it was open. And so they were playing in the snow, and they were making snow angels. And a coyote came into the yard, and the girls suddenly realized there was a coyote standing there looking at them. And they panicked, and they yelled, and they ran. And they ran up the stairs. And as they were running up the stairs, the coyote followed them and bit one of the girls in the back of the leg. It wasn't enough to break the skin, but still, it was concerning, and it caused a lot of concern in the community. And because I was doing environmental work in the community and was fairly well known, the town of Oakville asked me if I would go and create a presentation about coyotes to provide education to residents about coyotes in general, and to allay their fears about this incident that was widely publicized. And so based on the best advice from the Ministry of Natural Resources and from other ministries, some in the States, some in the western part of Canada, we put together a presentation about what to do, about coyotes, and about what to do if you see coyotes. So that's the presentation I'm going to present. I've given it many times, including to school groups. And please feel free, as I'm going along, if you have questions, to ask them, but there'll also be time at the end to ask questions. All right, so I'm just going to share my screen. And when I do, just let me know that everybody is seeing the presentation full screen. It just takes a second. Okay, so everyone should be seeing that full screen now.
Not quite full screen. There we go. Yep, we're
Okay.
good.
So it seems like there might be a little bit of delay. So as I'm going to be going through the slides, you might not be seeing what I'm seeing right at that minute, but if there's too long a delay, let me know. All right, so I called it Living with Coyotes, and I called it that because everyone in Southern Ontario is living with coyotes, whether you're living in a rural area or whether you're living in a big city. So coyotes are mammals who live in family groups, and the family groups consist of a breeding pair and their pups. Now, sometimes the pups from the year before will still be hanging around with their parents. They haven't quite gone out on their own yet, but basically there aren't like big groups of coyotes. Coyotes live in family groups. So breeding pair, their pups from potentially from the last year until they move out on their own, and their new pups from the current breeding season. Coyotes originally were not from this area. They were from the southwestern United States. But as wolves were wiped out by hunting all across North America, the coyotes looked around, saw their rivals, the wolves, were gone. And of course, they had all kinds of great habitat that they could move into. And they had an ecological niche they could move into. So the sort of reason for coyotes and wolves and some of those higher order predators are to keep a lot of other little things in check. And so they had lots of territory they could move into, and they had lots of game that they could go after. And so coyote populations started to spread. They moved east and they moved north. They've been in Ontario for well over 100 years now. They're really intelligent animals, and despite continuous hunting by humans, their population has grown all across North America. You can find them in every big city. In Toronto, Chicago, Vancouver, they're everywhere. So coyotes are generally small, with females weighing 13 to 16 kilograms and males weighing between 16 to 18. They tend to look bigger than that because they have a lot of fur. And so it makes their actual size look more impressive. They're territorial, which means that once a pair selects a particular site, they will guard that site against incursions from other coyotes. And so again, that's why you don't get big groups of coyotes. They're family groups and they guard their territory. In general, coyotes have a natural fear of humans, and they tend to avoid us as much as possible, which is why, despite the fact that they've been here for well over 100 years, we only rarely see them. It's not uncommon to hear them, especially in more rural areas, but we don't see them very often. And because they're afraid of humans and they do their best to stay away from us, attacks by coyotes on humans are very rare. Now, when they happen, they get a lot of publicity. So it really seems to, be more than what is actually going on, but they're very rare. So coyotes mate for life. The pups are born in April and May, and there's usually about 5 or 6 pups there. Like wolves, if there's a lot of food available, the litters tend to be larger. And if there's a food shortage, the litters will be smaller. And both parents share the puppy duties and teach the pups how to hunt. Coyotes usually prefer to live and hunt in fields and woodlands where there are lots of rabbits and mice. Coyotes play a really important role in the ecosystem, and their main role and their main food source is small rodents. So rabbits, mice, voles, the occasional squirrel if they can catch them. In some areas where there's larger deer populations, they're not a big enough animal to hunt deer per se, but if there's an old one or a young one and they get an opportunity to take it, they might. But it's really, really important to have these higher order predators in the environment to keep the rodent population down, partly for forest health. And so rabbits, mice, and voles all chew down young trees. And we saw a really great example of how different circumstances can combine to really impact forests when I was in Oakville and I created a tree planting program. And so over the course of 10 years, we ended up planting 17,000 native trees and shrubs in different parts of Oakville, all in public land. And one fall, we planted 200 trees in this woodlot that they were trying to revitalize. So they've done controlled burns, they've done all kinds of things to try and bring this woodland back to health. And now we were coming in planting 200 trees. Well, that same year, mange was going around through the coyote population. So that really had a big impact on their numbers. And then, you know, how sometimes you just have these cyclic changes in population. Well, the rabbit population was at an all-time high. So we had less predators than we needed, and we had a booming population of rabbits. And when we went back in the spring to see how that, you know, 200 tree planting was doing, there wasn't a single one left. Every single one had been chewed down by rabbits. And you can always tell it's rabbits because they have a bite that's on an angle. So you always saw where these little, you know, stems left of the baby trunks of trees chewed off. So not a single plant out of 200 survived. And that just gives you an idea of how important, you know, these relationships are in nature where you have predator and prey. So coyotes use dens when they're rearing pups. So the adults live out on the landscape, but they try and find a sheltered spot to raise their young. The dens can be holes that they dig out on hillsides or in fields or under rocky ledges. So our ravines and our creek sides are great places for coyote dens. They prefer to build dens close to water, and they do their very best to find well-hidden locations so nothing is disturbing the pups. Ravines in cities are perfect den sites, as I said, and coyotes guard pups fiercely. So it's important never to approach a den or pups. And before you came in, Annie and I were talking about how she had been walking her dogs on a trail a couple months ago. So, you know, right in the middle of pup season. And she saw a coyote on the trail that didn't move, despite her and her dogs being there. It didn't immediately take off. And we'll talk about what to do if that happens to you. But that was probably because there were pups nearby. That would be my guess. So coyotes are really adaptable animals, way more adaptable than wolves. And they've learned to live in our cities and our towns. They live in urban areas because, you know, humans are pretty messy creatures. We leave a lot of food waste around, and they're attracted to that, and the food's available. And also wherever humans are, mice and rats are too. And so they have lots of food available in cities. But living in cities can bring them into conflict with humans. You're most likely to see coyotes in the spring. And that's because they're hunting, the adults are hunting nonstop to try and keep the pups fed. So I know people get concerned when they see coyotes during the day, but it is not at all unusual, especially during the spring, to have adult coyotes wandering around because they're hunting for the pups. Now, usually when you tend to see them most is sometime between dawn and dusk, but sorry, you're more likely to see them at dawn and dusk, but it's not, as I said, unusual to see them during the day. And of course, you hear them a lot at night. In the wild, coyotes can live up to 14 years, but the young ones who aren't used to traffic often get hit by cars. And so because there are more losses for young coyotes in cities, the average lifespan of a city coyote is only 5 to 6 years. There are a lot of different reasons why you hear those really, I think, really wonderful howls. I like listening to them during the winter months, especially. We seem to hear them almost every night around my place. So one thing that they're doing is they're using those howlings to tell non-family members to stay out of their territory. So it's a way of claiming territory. It's also a way for them to keep track of each other. So the pups practice howling, and they can be very vocal in late summer as they attempt to mimic their parents. And another thing that the coyotes will do is if they sense a danger to their pups, the adult coyotes might start to make a lot of noise to try and attract attention away from the pups. So the adults will move away from the pups and start making noise to attract whatever they think the danger is towards them and away from the pups. If any of you have dogs, you've seen your dog do this toy, just bounce straight down with both paws. And that's just hunting behavior. That's, you know, from their wild genes. So this is a coyote hunting mice or voles in a grassland, and that's how they catch them. They have really sharp senses, both eyesight and hearing and smell. And so when they see something small in the grass, they pounce down with both paws, hanging onto it until they can grab it. Coyotes once in a while get into trouble with farmers by taking the occasional farm animal, whether it's chicken or sheep. And in cities, of course, as I mentioned, you know, we're pretty messy and we leave lots of things around for them to get into. They're not simply meat eaters. They'll eat bird seed, they'll eat fruit, fallen apples, all that kind of thing. They'll get into compost piles. One of the things that's really important is we should never let coyotes associate humans with food. And so in this case, we have a picture of somebody who's left some dog food outside for their dog, and the coyotes found it. And what the coyote is learning from this is I can get really close to humans and I can find food and I don't have to be afraid. And that's not a lesson we want them to learn. So we want to do everything that we can so that coyotes don't lose their natural fear of people and they never learn to associate us with food. So we should never, ever, ever feed coyotes. And the few times where there have been problem coyotes and they've had to take them down, including you know, a well-known case in Stanley Park in Vancouver, where a coyote bit a 3-year-old girl on the hand. When they autopsied that coyote, they found chicken stew in its stomach. So someone was feeding that coyote. And that tends to be what's behind any problematic coyote behavior, is that they've learned to associate humans with food. And oftentimes it's from people deliberately feeding them. And I know when we were in Oakville, there were consistent complaints from a couple of neighborhoods from certain people putting food out on the trails. Wild animals do not need to be fed by us. They're perfectly capable of finding their own food. And when we feed them, we put them and ourselves in danger, because coyotes that start approaching people are going to be found to be problematic and they will be shot. They won't be relocated. They'll be removed. And so it's a dangerous thing. Coyotes are also likely to be cats and small dogs as prey. So it's important when you're in natural areas not to let your dogs off leash, especially in the spring and especially when coyotes are more apt to be very protective of any potential pups. Keep your pets close to you. So if you're walking with the dog on a leash, keep the dog close to you, not on a long leash in a natural area, and never let your cats wander. So coyotes can climb fences. So if you have small dogs and you're in an area where you know there are coyotes, important not to let them out by themselves at night. So some people have said, you know, why can't we just get rid of coyotes? Coyotes don't belong in cities. We should eliminate them. And the short answer is we can't eliminate them because they've adapted to our environment. And as long as the habitat exists, if we remove one animal or one family of animals, as long as the habitat is good, other coyotes will move in. So, you know, as I said at the very beginning, despite the fact that coyotes have been under very intense hunting pressure for decades, their population has only expanded. And that's also partly to do with what we call compensatory reproductive strategies. And basically what that means is the more heavily they're hunted, the more pups they have. So just like I mentioned earlier on in the presentation, when food supplies are short, they regulate their reproduction. So they may not have any pups in a bad year, or they may have just a couple. And when food is plentiful, they'll have more. It's the same thing with hunting. If they're under intense hunting pressure, they simply have more pups. Coyotes are also hard to trap because they're smart and they avoid traps. They can't be relocated. And they can't be relocated for several different reasons. One, every place that should have coyotes has coyotes. So moving a coyote from one area into another is just putting it into another creature's habitat. And as we mentioned earlier, coyotes are territorial and they won't allow other coyotes to move into their territory. And second, there's a concern about spreading disease, whether it's things like rabies, which of course is very rare here, things like mange. So they don't want to move animals from one place to another. So they do not move animals. Animals are not relocated. If there's a problematic coyote in one place, it's removed permanently. And also, as we said before, coyotes serve a really important purpose in the ecosystem by keeping rodents under control. We actually need those higher order predators, things like hawks, or otherwise we'd be overrun with rodents. So they're very adaptable animals. They've learned to live with us, and we have to learn to live with them. We've heard a lot lately about coy wolves, and I tend to feel that, you know, it's a lot of talk that just seems to try and make more afraid of coyotes, make them seem more scary than they actually are. Now, while it's true that a lot of coyotes in the eastern part of North America have some wolf DNA in their system, they're still coyotes and they act like coyotes. So they might have a fraction of wolf DNA, but it doesn't make them wolves. It's the same thing with most Western Europeans have a little bit of Neanderthal DNA in our genes, but we are not Neanderthals, we're Homo sapiens. So, all right, so are coyotes dangerous? Well, you know, they can be to some extent if we feed them, if they lose their fear of us, but really overall, are they dangerous? No. In all the decades that coyotes have lived in Ontario, there have only been really a handful of instances of coyotes biting people. And to put that in perspective, in the same year that incident happened that I told you about the 2 young girls, that same year where there was one bite, and that's the only time there's been a bite from a coyote to a human in Oakville, there were 281 cat bites that same year, and or scratches that were serious enough to be reported to the health department. And there were 222 dog bites. So if you keep it in perspective, are coyotes dangerous? They can be, but are they in reality? Not really. So if we want to keep coyotes away from our homes, it's important not to leave pet food out. It's important to clean up after your dog, to clean up fallen fruit, to make sure that you put your garbage out in the morning, not the night before, so it doesn't attract them. And if you have gates in your property going onto natural areas, keep them closed. It's also really important around schoolyards that litter, especially food waste, be cleaned up because coyotes are attracted to food. And there have been instances where, and I've done presentations for schools where they have seen coyotes around their schoolyards. And so the main thing there is to do cleanups and make sure there's nothing there to attract them. So let's talk about what coyotes normally do when they see humans. Normally, coyotes turn and go in the other direction. And the reason they run away from us, they have this instinctive human fear of us, and they should, because they've been widely hunted. But also, we're not their food. They feed mostly on small rodents, rabbits, mice, and voles. And so, like any predator, coyotes don't want to take on something bigger and stronger than them that could potentially hurt them. Because if they're hurt, they can't hunt. If they can't hunt, they can't eat, and therefore they won't survive. And so predators tend to avoid tangling with anything that they perceive to be more dangerous than themselves. So one of the key things that we have to remember when we see coyotes is we're not rabbits, mice, and voles. We are to a coyote a big, strong, scary human, and we have to act that way. Sometimes when people are walking, they report that it seemed like a coyote was following them, not close, but sort of in the bushes along as they were walking along. And that can be a behavior called shadowing. Because coyotes are territorial, sometimes they may see a large dog as a rival. And so they just want to make sure that rival is not sticking around in their territory, that the person and the animal are continuing to walk out of their area. It doesn't mean an attack is coming. It just means they're keeping watch. All right, so if you're in natural areas, there's no need to be afraid of coyotes, but just stay alert and stay on the paths. Make sure if you never den or pups, and that you keep your dogs on leashes in natural areas. Just remember, you're bigger and scarier than coyotes, and they're usually timid animals that stay away from humans. If you're walking your dog, keep them on a leash and keep them very close to you. If you have so it's very unlikely, of course, that a coyote would attack a human. It's even more unlikely they'd attack a human with a dog. because that's two big scary things. But if you have a small dog, you see a coyote, the best thing to do is pick the small dog up, hold it against your chest with one hand, put your other arm up in the air and start waving your arm as high as you can and as wide as you can to make yourself appear bigger, and start to yell at the coyote. So don't move, face the coyote, keep your eyes on it, hold the dog against you, wave your arm over your head and yell until it goes away. Same thing if you're just on your own and you happen to see a coyote. You want to make yourself as big as possible. The one thing you can't do is run. Any of you who have dogs know that if you start to run, your dog runs with you. And that's prey instinct. That is instinct born into hunting animals. And so it's the same with coyotes. If you start to run, it's instinct will tell it to chase you. Because the only thing that's away from coyotes are things like rabbits, mice, and wolves. Humans don't run from bears, don't run from coyotes, cougars don't run from coyotes. So, you have to face the animal. If you're by yourself, put both arms over your head, wave them widely, yell really loudly. Don't scream, because you want to use your, you want to use your human voice. You don't want to make a high-pitched sound that could sound like a rabbit or a mouse or a bull. You want to sound like a big, strong, scary human. And so yell at it in a loud human voice. If it doesn't still immediately move away when you do that, then you can pick up something, anything, doesn't matter what, stick, stone, your jacket, your backpack, your shoe, and throw it towards the animal. And then it'll move away. So, coyotes have been in our communities for a very long time. As I mentioned at the beginning, well over 100 years, but we hardly ever see them because they do that to avoid us. So we don't need to be afraid of them, but we need to keep them wild and we need to discourage them from having contact with us. So we need to basically try and remain good neighbors. And that's it, but I am happy to take any questions that anybody has.
I'll ask one. Is there coyote dogs?
So there are coyotes that have a little bit of dog DNA too. That's also not unusual. All those species can interbreed with each other, wolves and coyotes and dogs, but it's rare.
Okay. So yeah, I used to live in Niagara-on-the-Lake, and they said up near Queenston Heights, there's all these coyote dogs that run around. I've never seen one, but yeah, I just kind of found that interesting when you said they mix with the wolves. So yeah. Interesting.
They haven't found any big sharing of DNA, but there is a little bit. Oh. Now, it's a little different down in some parts of the United States where some people were deliberately breeding coyotes and dogs and then selling them as hybrids, just like they were selling wolf and dog hybrids, which is a really horrible idea.
Yeah, no.
not a good idea. But yes, aside from some deliberate interference that I know of down in the States, I don't know of any big DNA matches.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that was very informative. Anybody else have any questions or comments? Anybody have any stories?
I have something that I read this morning, and then I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I love the comment. I love the comparison to the number of cat and dog bites, to the one coyote bite. But I came across a really funny one. The coyote attacks on people are so rare that more people are killed by stray golf balls and flying champagne corks. I thought that was not for your school presentations, but for us. That obviously most incidents are in fact preventable. Okay, but my question is, what can we do? As you know, there's always the hysterics out there, and I noted with great dismay when I was sort of looking around about this, and I see that they can be hunted in Ontario. There's no bounty hunting or whatever, but my fear is that the ones who are the loudest are the ones who have the one, you know, it's like if it bleeds, it leads, you know?
Mhm.
So, I was thinking about, you know, how the pollinator paths, what about coyote corridors? I mean, what can we be doing in that way to help? Maybe, I don't know, if they have their own areas, we can't create new ones, or can we?
And I don't really think we can. As I mentioned, you know, they're very adaptable and they've adapted to our city life. So they live in natural areas, what little there is left of them, but they also are quite comfortable in our urban environments. So I don't think there's any way that we can create special areas for them or enhance their habitats in any way. They're so intelligent and adaptable that they figured it out, you know, despite what we've done to the natural habitat, they figured out how to survive in ours. So I don't think that's possible. One thing we can do to counter some of the hysteria around coyotes is just, you know, tell the facts. And the bottom line is that at least with the Ministry of Natural Environment or Natural Resources, there's an ally, because what I'm telling you is what they tell people. You can't relocate coyotes. You can't get rid of coyotes. You have to learn to live with them. And this is how you have to behave around them if you encounter one. So at least, you know, the provincial ministry is saying what I'm saying what they're saying. So there won't be a different story, no matter who's complaining about them. But I think the real thing is, you know, we have to teach people that wild animals don't need to be fed, because I see a lot of feeding around. You know, birds in your backyard are one thing, and even that we have to be careful of right now because of avian flu, so we shouldn't even be doing that. But no wildlife needs to be fed, and it always ends badly for the wildlife, and we need to get that message out. The other thing that I wanted to say too is it's really important to teach kids what to do if they encounter a coyote. And that's why, you know, I enjoyed doing the school presentation so much, because children out, you know, walking around in conservation areas or walking the family dog, they need to know what to do too.
We'll keep doing these presentations because it's part of the solution.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Any other experiences anybody's had? Or I know now not to run when I'm with my dog, but this was a big coyote. It was the middle of the day, and so probably it did have some pups in the area. And because my dog is only about 18 months, of course, my dog started barking at it, which made the coyote kind of come towards us. So we turned and ran the other way. But it's good to know just by waving your arms and doing other things that that's a little bit better than running away. So yeah, some good tips there. Thank you, Liz.
Yeah, so in that situation, what I would recommend is, because you had a dog with you too, wave your arms and yell at the coyote, but back away.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't suggest just standing there, because you also had a young, excitable dog with you.
Yes.
That was attracting the coyote's attention.
Very
So
much.
I would back away while you're yelling at the coyote, while you're waving your other arm, making you and your dog a big scary thing.
Right.
And in the end, even though you ran, that coyote didn't follow you.
No, it looked like it was going to for like a second or so. It got up and kind of came toward us, but that was it. But he did not stop blocking the path for us to go by him. So we just went way around the other way to get to our car. So I think it would have been a bit different if I was with somebody else as well, but it was just myself and the dog. So it was a little intimidating, and the coyote was big and obviously protecting its pups. So, you know. So had to do what he had to do, I guess.
I have a question to
Yeah.
Liz too. Big and loud. So what about, like, I've seen some comments where people, you know, carry bear spray and those air horns. Like, I don't know, are they effective or are they more detrimental than good?
Well, I don't think you need to use bear spray, because again, you know, going back to like, what are the real instances when you hear people talking about, oh, we saw a coyote, they saw a coyote, and what happened? Nothing happened, right? They saw a coyote. Oh, it was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I saw a coyote going down my street. And nothing happened.
Yeah.
You know, so it's a rare case even of a coyote doing what happened with you, Annie, where it was in the path and it didn't move. That's rare. You know, usually people will see coyotes and they're moving, or they look at the person. So twice in the 14 years I've lived on my property here in Vineland, twice I've been out in the middle of the day on my property, which I said backs right onto a ravine, and we get all kinds of wildlife here. And I saw a coyote twice during the middle of the day. Both times I noticed the coyote noticed me, it turned around and took off into the ravine. That is what normally happens when people see a coyote. It's on its way doing something and it keeps going, or it sees the person and it takes off. So so Leslie, to your point, I don't think bear spray is necessary to deal with coyotes. If people feel more comfortable carrying it, okay, but I don't see that it's going to be that useful. In terms of an air horn, yes, a loud noise may startle the coyote, and that may be fine, but also yelling at the coyote and waving your hands is probably enough to startle it. Being big and intimidating, we're not mice and bulls. We're not something to eat. Why would they want to deal with us?
Yeah, no, I understand. I just want to be able to, tell folks that, because it's really, I don't know where this fear has come from them. It's, people, I don't know, I guess they're getting more frightened of everything, unfortunately. The dark, this, I don't want to go out at night. Oh, wow, okay. Nighttime is one of my favorite times to be out.
Well, we need to arm people with facts, right? And you can always give them the statistic I just gave you. In all of Oakville's history, there was one incident with a coyote in that exact same year. If you add up the dog and cat bites and scratches that had to be reported, it was about 500 in a single year.
Yeah.
So, let's talk about relative risk. It's very low.
Exactly. Well, even, if anybody's done any backcountry camping or anything in Algonquin, it's the same thing when you run across a bear. Be big, loud, don't leave your food out. Hang it, somewhere not between you and your campsite and wherever the bear's going. It is a lot of common sense, and people, yeah, you're right. You're so right. They're not pets and we don't need to feed them.
Are they more hungry because they come out during the day? Aren't they usually nocturnal, where they come out more at night, and it's kind of unusual to see them more during the day? Is it because they're starving, or they're just?
No, they're active all the time.
Okay.
They can possibly be more active at night, but as I mentioned, especially because they're trying to avoid us, right? We're not around as much at night, so it's easier for them to be out at night. That's mostly the reason, but during the spring, when they're trying to feed their pups, you're going to see them because they're going to be active all the time because they're trying to keep the pups fed.
Yeah.
Interesting. Any other
we do
comments?
We see them all the time on the creek. We have a creek behind our house, and in the wintertime when it's frozen, it becomes like an animal corridor that they aren't able to usually use. Mm-hmm. But they're up and down there all the time, and we hear them all around. It's part of living here. It's a cool part, because I love to hear them sing. So
beautiful.
Okay, anything else?
I think that's it. Well, thanks again for Liz for coming today. And we were just talking about maybe doing a trumpet swan presentation, because I guess they're most visible, you said, between December and April. So I'm hoping maybe we can do that in October or November, but we'll chat about that, and everybody can just look at our website to see when that's coming up. So thanks again to Liz and everybody that joined us here at the library today.
Great. Thank you so much, everybody.
Okay. Have a good long weekend.
You too.